Senior delegations from Russia and the United States have met in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, marking the highest level meeting between the two nations in 3 years. Could this be the start of a potential reset in US-Russia relations? And more importantly, what does it mean for the war in Ukraine? For the past few years, US-Russia relations have been virtually non-existent. Washington has been Ukraine's biggest supporter in its war against Russia, providing billions in military and financial aid, while mobilizing NATO and the broader Western alliance in what has effectively become a proxy war between Russia and the West. So when it was announced that senior officials from both sides were meeting, the world was watching closely. The groundwork for these talks had been building for weeks. First, US President Donald Trump held a phone call with Vladimir Putin, described by both sides as productive and positive. They agreed to begin negotiations on a settlement for Ukraine. This was followed by an unexpected goodwill gesture, a prisoner exchange. Russia released American teacher Mark Fogel, previously imprisoned on espionage charges, while the US freed Alexander Vinnik, a Russian national convicted of money laundering. Shortly after, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had his first official conversation with Marco Rubio, the newly appointed US Secretary of State. Then both sides agreed to meet on neutral ground in Saudi Arabia, a country that maintains strong diplomatic ties with both Washington and Moscow. The choice of delegates signaled how seriously both sides were taking these talks. The US delegation was led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, accompanied by National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, a former military veteran, and Steve Witkoff, a billionaire real estate developer turned special envoy, who reportedly held direct talks with Putin during the prisoner swap negotiations. On the Russian side, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, regarded as one of the world's most skilled diplomats, led the delegation. He was joined by Yuri Ushakov, Putin's longtime foreign policy advisor, whose 5 decades of diplomatic experience have made him a key figure in Russia's strategic maneuvering. The talks lasted over 4 hours, and by the end, both sides appeared satisfied with the results. Several key agreements were made. The US and Russia agreed to immediately reopen embassies in Washington and Moscow, reinstating ambassadors, a small but significant step, highlighting how badly relations had deteriorated. Both sides agreed to appoint high-level teams to begin working toward a negotiated settlement for Ukraine. They also discussed the possibility of economic cooperation, though details remain vague. Finally, both sides committed to preparing for a direct meeting between Trump and Putin, something that would have been unimaginable just months ago. Perhaps the most significant aspect of this meeting was who wasn't at the table. Neither Ukraine nor the European Union had a seat, causing an immediate meltdown in Kyiv and across European capitals. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded sharply, saying, "Negotiations should not take place behind our backs." Meanwhile, European leaders reacted with alarm. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz reiterated there must be no decision over the heads of Ukraine, with similar concerns echoed from London to Paris. This meeting raises serious strategic questions for Ukraine and its European allies. Is Washington now pursuing a separate peace with Moscow? If so, what does that mean for Europe's role in the war? And is Ukraine being sidelined in decisions about its own future? Taking emotions out of the equation, these developments could have far-reaching consequences beyond Ukraine. The US is signaling that Europe must take more responsibility for its own security rather than relying on Washington. This aligns with Trump's long-held view that NATO allies should increase their defense spending. It also follows 3 years of Europe's economic and energy decoupling from Russia, a policy that has severely damaged European economies. Now, European leaders must ask themselves whether this decoupling was truly in their interests, or if they blindly followed Washington's lead without an independent foreign policy. Some US officials have even referred to Europe as vassal nations. A dramatic statement, but one that may not be entirely unfounded. Was it worth it? The same question applies to Ukraine, a country devastated by war. Should Ukraine have pursued NATO membership so openly, knowing it would provoke a confrontation with Russia? Or should it have maintained neutrality, recognizing that Russia will always be its neighbor? Many argue that it was Ukraine's sovereign right to choose its alliances. But in realpolitik, the cold, pragmatic world of geopolitics, ignoring power dynamics and geography can be catastrophic. In hindsight, the warning signs were there as far back as the 2014 Maidan uprising. The moment Ukraine pivoted toward the West, a direct conflict with Russia became inevitable. Whether that confrontation could have been delayed or avoided is now a question for history. But what's clear today is that the geopolitical chessboard is shifting, and Ukraine, along with Europe, may not like where it's heading. Beyond Ukraine, there's a broader strategic dimension to these talks. It's no secret that China, not Russia, is now America's main strategic rival. Since the start of the Ukraine war, Russia has been forced into a closer alliance with China, out of necessity, not choice. If we take a step back, could it actually be in America's long-term interest to pull Russia away from China's orbit? Having two major global powers, China and Russia, aligned against the US is a strategic nightmare for Washington. If the US can offer Moscow an off-ramp from its current isolation, it could be part of a larger plan to weaken Beijing's influence. One aspect of these talks that hasn't been widely discussed is the Arctic. All global powers are scrambling for dominance over this resource-rich, strategically crucial region. The fact that Arctic security was reportedly discussed in Riyadh suggests that this meeting wasn't just about Ukraine. It was about shaping the future of global power. These talks may not be what they seem on the surface. Yes, resolving the Ukraine war is a central issue, but there's a bigger strategic play unfolding. Despite the hysteria in Western media, America is not going to let Russia take the US for a ride. That would be naive. In a world where old geopolitical rules are being rewritten, all major powers, the United States, Russia, China, are maneuvering to advance their national interests. Smaller countries, unfortunately, often pay the price. Over the coming weeks, Europe must make a critical choice. Will it continue its current path, throwing billions into a war with no clear end? Or will it shape an independent foreign policy that prioritizes its own economic and security interests? If Europe fails to act strategically, it risks being reduced to a passive spectator, while the real geopolitical decisions are made elsewhere. Of course, this is just my take. What do you guys think? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching, and please suggest topics you'd like to see in future videos. Take care, guys.